Yes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our workshop. We have a lot of people registered, so we are going to give just a few minutes to make sure everybody gets logged on and is here and is at a good place. So we'll start in just a few minutes. For those just joining us, we're just giving a few minutes for everyone to get online, make sure you're set and comfortable. So we plan to start here at 2:05 Mountain Time, 4:05 Eastern Time. For those just joining, we're going to start in about 60 seconds. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, and welcome everyone to this virtual workshop on the Energy Improvement in Rural and Remote Areas program out of the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations under the Department of Energy. My name is Courtney Haynes, and I lead the stakeholder engagement for this provision. I'm excited that we've had so many people across the country register and join us here today and tomorrow. And I'm hopeful that you'll understand more about the program, the stage we're in here at OCED, learn about opportunities that align with the provision, and also give you an opportunity to provide feedback from your own experience directly to us. Taking a step back, the Energy Improvement in Rural Remote Areas program is a $1 billion program designed to provide financial assistance to improve in rural remote areas across the U.S. the resilience, the safety, the reliability, and availability of energy, and also environmental protection from adverse impacts of energy generation. Eligible uses include overall cost effectiveness of energy generation, transmission, or distribution systems, siting or upgrading transmission and distribution lines, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from energy generation by rural remote areas, providing or modernizing electric generation facilities, developing microgrids, and increasing energy efficiency. So, as you can see, this program is quite broad, which is really important given the youth demonstration potential in rural and remote areas. Before we progress today's presentations any further and review the agenda and set some expectations, I want to introduce my colleague at NREL, Jess Townsend, to walk us through some housekeeping information regarding Zoom and other technical features. Jess?
Thanks so much, Courtney. I'm Jess Townsend with NREL Communications. I'm going to be your Zoom host today and tomorrow for your virtual workshop. Again, before we begin, I'm just going to review a few quick housekeeping items and then pass the mic back to Courtney. First, this meeting is being recorded, and the webinar recording as well as the presentation deck will both be posted to the OCED website after the webinar. That link is shown on the screen here for you, so energy.gov/OCED. Otherwise, this is a webinar format, so be aware that your microphone and camera are disabled. So no need to worry if you've accidentally unmuted or come on camera, we've already got you sorted. If you have a question, please submit it via the Q&A panel. I see that we've already had some questions submitted, so that's great. If it's not appearing for you, simply move your cursor to the bottom edge of your screen and it'll show up. Your hosts are going to do their best today to answer as many questions as possible during today's event. But again, we have a big crowd here today, so please bear with us if not all the questions get answered immediately. And with that, I will pass the mic back to you, Courtney. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess. I'd like to give a special shout out to Jess here today, given all of her help with coordinating this event. She's a true superstar. And as she mentioned, this Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, that's the best way that you're going to be able to engage with us today. Tomorrow, we're going to have some other opportunities to pull feedback from you and to generate more conversations. If you're having any technical related questions or program specific questions, please submit through that Q&A. And like Jess said, we have staff on board to respond to these questions, hopefully in real time, but we might not get to every question. But good news is we will take down all of these questions and produce an FAQ document that we'll create and host on our website and routinely update. I'll also follow up with all of you, since we now have your emails, with the FAQs after the event itself. Next slide. Oh, we're here at the agenda already. So just to give some context, this virtual workshop is one of 3 that we've already conducted. We had 2 that were in person, the first in Golden, Colorado, which was in mid-October, and the second one was in Little Rock, Arkansas, which was just last week. Both of these in-person workshops have been so informative to the OCED team, as it's really imperative to learn what's happening on the ground. This virtual workshop, it was the most registered, way past the in-person events, with several hundreds of people across the country, which also makes sense given the vast spectrum of needs and opportunities in mere location in rural and remote America. We greatly appreciate your time here today. And we also know it's a lot. It's a lot to take this time from your day-to-day. So again, we're very grateful. The objective of the workshop today is to provide more information to you about this program, OCED's design process in general, and to share more information about the technical assistance in the works for this program. In addition, tomorrow's session, we'll hear and participate dialogue with experts via panels and also have that interactive polling session I discussed earlier. Those questions for tomorrow will align with the request for information that's now public for this provision. However, it doesn't take the place of individual responses. We have about 2 hours today, this afternoon, to hear from our OCED team, starting off with Regina Gaylor and Sarah Moore. Then we'll move into dialogue with Melissa Climbara and Jill Capitoso. With that, I'd like to ask Regina and Sarah to come on video and begin their presentations. But Regina, before we start, since you are the program manager of this provision, would love if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself your expertise, and specifically why you're so excited to be the program manager for this provision.
Thank you very much, Courtney. You can hear me okay? Thanks to you and to Jess. And I want to thank our Department of Energy, laboratory, and other team members who worked behind the scenes, in addition to those who are on the webinar today, for all of the work you did to bring all of us together. So that is all of us plus more than 300 participants. And we're really excited to be here with you. So I'm Regina Gaylor. It's an honor to be here with you. And myself specifically, I have been almost 20 years running big programs for Department of Energy, but I made a big switch to come to this new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and in a way went back to my roots. I have been working in national security for 18 years for the National Nuclear Security Administration within Department of Energy. And prior to that, I studied environmental science and public administration, did some climate mitigation modeling work for my thesis in graduate school. And back then, we read about hydrogen fuel cell technology, about carbon capture sequestration, and those technologies and the potential to utilize them at scale to mitigate carbon emissions just seemed so far out there that we couldn't really include them in our recommendations. That's changed, obviously. This organization is here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the why and what we are as a program. But for myself personally, it's really an honor, and it's pretty excited to be part of this, knowing how far we've come and that we're working toward a green energy economy in the United States. Next slide, please. So I'm the program manager for this provision. It's a part of this big Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations that's brand new. We're building it as we go within Department of Energy. This provision, as Courtney mentioned, is improving energy or energy improvements in rural or remote areas. And as she said, aiming to improve resilience and reliability, provision of energy across rural or remote US. And the rural or remote definition that we use, that we draw from, is incorporated or unincorporated towns, cities, communities, areas of less than 10,000 inhabitants. We recognize a particular need in those areas, and while we hope to improve reliability and hopefully reach some new benchmarks for consistent energy provision across rural United States, we hope that this provision, this acronym is ERA, and we'll try not to rely on acronyms for the sake of everybody joining the call, but this provision we hope will bridge a gap, absorb some risk, and mitigate the risk that might have prevented private sector actors, investors, developers from pursuing large clean energy demonstrations in the past in rural America. So a little bit of background, the International Energy Agency notes that in order to achieve carbon zero or net zero carbon emissions economy energy systems by 2050, we need $90 billion of investments through the next 10 years in this decade, the 2020s. Big clean energy demonstrations like the ones that we hope to build and promote through this provision. And given the need to demonstrate at scale, commercially available in areas, or demonstrations that haven't been done before, we want to work with our stakeholders to understand how best to go about this. We expect that we would promote market adoption following these clean energy demonstration programs. So we have a lot, we're ambitious, but we really believe we're going to be able to do this, and especially including what we've heard so far in workshops like this. Real quick, I think you know the two historic pieces of legislation that have enabled this program were the bilateral infrastructure law in November of 2021, and then the Inflation Reduction Act in August of this calendar year. Between those two appropriations, we received $25 billion to do clean energy demonstrations through this Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations in DOE. Next slide, please. So as Courtney said, we have $1 billion. This money is available to us as appropriated through 2026. And you will hear us talk in these presentations today and more in discussions tomorrow about our emphasis on economic development, workforce development, environmental justice in rural and remote areas that we want to serve across America. And we would expect our first solicitation, our first funding opportunity announcement to come next calendar year in 2023. Courtney ran through for you the requirements of the objectives that are listed on the right of this slide that outline for us our duties through this program, this provision of the BIL legislation. But I just point out to you that this one is different from some of the other programs that were funded through this $25 billion in the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, like the really exciting hydrogen hubs, carbon capture sequestration, broad energy grid improvements, and even nuclear reactors. This provision is not technology specific, but rather outlines these desires, these interests and need to improve efficiency, resiliency, cost effectiveness, and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions through these big projects in rural America. Next slide, please. You'll hear us focus on community and worker needs, justice, and equity. We want to address the needs specifically in rural and remote America as we're charged by the legislation, both reliability of energy generation and also to mitigate the impacts of climate change. We understand that rural and remote Americans share a disproportionate cost burden for energy generation, and especially with the dramatic weather swings and changes that are impacts of climate change, the inconsistently maintained generation infrastructure that leads to rural communities, and a more commonly aged housing stock mean that it takes more money to keep up with and try to address those weather changes. We recognize the need to facilitate trusting relationships, both among the recipients, the communities where we want to do these demonstration projects or that we want to benefit from demonstration projects, and the technical experts, engineers, community advocates, governments, developers, and others to maintain the systems, to maintain the effects and continue innovating for evolving energy needs. But we also hope and expect to connect communities with similar issues, similar challenges at achieving reliable energy generation. And lastly, I'll point out that we're conducting these workshops to try to hear from stakeholders about the kinds of energy projects that are out there, the demand that's out there, the kinds of groups that can and would work together out there. But we recognize that we will need to provide technical assistance of some form. So we're also looking for your insights on what would be most useful, and we'll figure out how we can best fund that and work that into our programming. Technical assistance at the front end that helps advise communities, especially those that don't have extra personnel in municipalities or local governments, with hours to understand and respond, much less implement big energy projects funded through our program. And also as we go through and implement, once we have selected and are moving toward demonstration projects, and we're really excited thinking ahead to that. Next slide, please. So our goals for these workshops are to understand, to share with you the basics and what we can share so far about our program, who we are, recognizing that there are a lot of opportunities out there right now through these two pieces of legislation. We can't answer all your questions, but we'll try to explain who we are and how that may differ from the other federal funding opportunities coming down for clean energy in rural remote America. We want to hear your ideas about the potential projects that you might propose to us. And we will integrate all of that feedback along with what we've heard before in the prior workshops, what we gather in our request for information that's out on the street. And Sarah Moore of our team is going to tell you more about that. And we will build our funding opportunity announcements. This is the last, as Courtney said, of 3 big workshops. And then we'll be thinking about webinars going forward, and would like to hear from you what else, if there are more deep dives or specific communities we could focus on that will be helpful. Courtney, who introduced us, will be the ongoing face once we get into technically contracting processes, whereas program people will have to stand back from engagement with the public that may be submitting proposals to us. But again, we would work toward a funding opportunity announcement in 2023. And this is the first time that we'll show you our email address. That's a box that comes to all of us on the team. We're receiving requests for information responses there. We're receiving questions there. We're interested to hear from you broadly there. And as Courtney said, we will be working to get back to you as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So that was backdrop on why we're here. A little bit just quickly about who we are and what we are. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations is this new organ within Department of Energy under a new undersecretary arm that's funded by the Bilateral Infrastructure Law, also having received Inflation Reduction Act monies. And this particular program we're talking to you about today and tomorrow, if you look at this diagram, the lower left box is this energy improvements in rural and remote areas. Sister provision to all of these other, some technology specific that I told you about, nuclear, hydrogen hubs, carbon capture sequestration. There's also grid improvements, industrial materials, a lot of exciting stuff, but this growing federal team. And we hope generally that our demonstration programs, our demonstration projects, ultimately that we fund through this office will help bridge the gap and demonstrate commercially available technology in rural remote areas where it hasn't been the case before, or otherwise demonstrate clean energy projects that then our private and community stakeholders and partners can run with and replicate elsewhere. Next slide. Just a few more comments before we'll tell you a little bit more about our request for information that's out there right now. So the kinds of risks that we know we'll be shouldering through these programs that we hope to hear more about and address the optimum and the best that we can through our funding opportunity announcement and ultimately our selections. We know there's going to be technology risk mitigation, both where commercially available technologies, clean energy systems have not been demonstrated at scale in rural remote places. And before now, we know that we will have opportunities and we hope to do a lot to mitigate business models where we will look for proposals and projects maybe that demonstrate a novel kind of financing or projected revenue operations, maintenance for big energy systems that have not been demonstrated before. And maybe there's a new or novel aggregation of projects in ways that sufficiently hedges risk that had not been demonstrated before, but is possible now given our cost share. We understand that we'll be working to mitigate workforce risk. Maybe proposals could cover novel engagements with labor or other worker organizations. Training, workforce training will be a big part of maintaining and sustaining energy systems, we understand, and developing innovation and local entrepreneurs to continue to address evolving energy needs. And when we talk about community impact risk mitigation, that includes for us demonstrating greenhouse gas mitigation and prevention strategies, especially in prior underserved communities. This is communities of color and others who have been historically underserved. And my colleague Jill Capitosto is going to tell you a little bit more about our program requirements and our charges in that area of serving communities. It's important to our program. Next slide, please. So we are developing this program through these workshops. We have this request for information out on the street, which is the beginning of a long process toward funding opportunity announcements by which you and other stakeholders will submit proposals for clean energy demonstrations in rural and remote America. We're going to combine that information with information from the workshops and foundational analyses that our laboratory experts are doing for us. And we're thinking through and are interested to hear your feedback on potential other competitive funding opportunities like prizes that our colleagues in Department of Energy have a lot of experience with, seeding awareness in communities and helping build capacity, advising and consulting on energy ideas in a way that communities can shore up and better meet the requirements of a big funding opportunity announcement. There are other opportunities, we hope, potentially with intermediary organizations. We may be able to set up partnership intermediary agreements where we rely on community partners, nonprofit partners, others regionally to do a lot of outreach with us. And we really want, and we'll be working toward enduring program impacts. So we want to demonstrate projects in clean energy that can be replicated. That's very important for us. And we'll choose to mitigate risks according to that very important principle. And we'll be trying to build in measurement and validation. And we recognize, we have this $1 billion and we'll be sending out funding opportunity announcements with that funding through 2026, but we will be improving ourselves as we go. We'll take the lessons we learn in this first funding opportunity announcement in 2023 and all of this other programming that we may implement, and we will work toward targeting more, doing all that we can to do the most in these kinds of demonstration projects across communities. And we hope that we will be able to, like I said, forming those relationships locally and regionally, also put communities together for relationships. So communities sharing the same kinds of challenges to combat climate change, to try to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, and importantly, also shore up energy generation, can rely on each other and learn from each other's situations. Next slide. I am going to pass the baton to Sarah Moore of our team, and she'll tell you about this request for information. Thank you very much for your patience and for being with us and listening to me today.
Yeah, thank you, Regina. So my name is Sarah Moore. I'm a technology policy fellow in the Department of Energy Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which is sort of parallel to the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, but spend a lot of my time helping out with the rural remote areas provision. So really excited to be here today. We have over 350 people now, so it's really exciting to see so many people excited and interested in improving energy in rural remote areas of the United States. So our first formalized attempt to get feedback from everyone on this call and all the other stakeholders interested in this provision is through a request for information, or RFI. You might hear that acronym throughout the next few days. So the RFI is live, it's available. The purpose of this RFI is to solicit feedback on energy needs in your community, and how you think you could use this funding, this $1 billion available to address those energy needs, what ideas for projects you have, as well as how you think they could benefit your community. This is a really awesome opportunity to help us form a brand new program. We're really starting this from the ground up, and this is just a great opportunity to help us figure out how to form this program to best serve your community. So we're going to be using this information to form the program, and your input is extremely important to that. We're looking for feedback from everybody that has a part to play in energy transitions in rural areas. This could include the community, residents of rural or remote areas that are excited about energy, environmental justice and energy justice organizations or other community-based organizations, tribal organizations. The industry also has a lot of really important information for us, government, from other federal regulatory agencies to state and local governments, and American Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages. We also think that it's really important to take workforce and economic impact. So we're looking to hear from labor unions, workforce training organizations, economic development organizations, and also anyone else that thinks that they have some input to provide on energy in rural areas, like conservation and environmental groups or academic and research institutions. So as I said, the RFI is open now and responses are due November 28th. We also have an option in addition to submitting written responses or instead of, we also have the ability to schedule a 30-minute call with DOE staff in case it's easier for you to discuss responses verbally rather than writing everything down. Next slide, please. So the request for information is soliciting information across a few different categories or areas. There's several questions under each of these categories. The first sort of deals with respondent characteristics, so understanding, who you are, the perspective that your organization is coming from, and why you're interested in the ERA program, so we can really understand the audience that will be applying for this funding. Then the next category deals with potential project details. So this is your opportunity to tell us, what you see this money going towards in your communities. How big are projects? How long do they take? How much can you contribute to cost share for programs, which I see lots of questions on cost share in the Q&A so far. We also have a section on program structure. So in addition to traditional DOE funding opportunity announcements or FOAs, what other things would you like to see? Regina mentioned potentially prizes. There are other funding mechanisms that we could use. And so if you have any ideas on how those have worked well in the past or how they could be implemented in the future to serve rural America, this is your opportunity to give us your ideas. And then finally, we have an open category for you to just provide any additional information you think would be useful to us informing this program that we didn't think to ask about. And you can find the RFI questions on OCED There's a link there. Yeah, and next slide, please. I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Regina and Sarah. Before we move on to Melissa, I do want to ask a few questions that both have come in through the Q&A on this webinar itself, but also that have been asked in the workshops that we did in Colorado and Arkansas. So Regina, I'll start with you. You've been traveling across the country for these workshops. You've been taking many one-to-one meetings as well with potential stakeholders who will be impacted by this program. What question has been the most common, and what's your answer to that?
Thank you. A few questions, I would say. The most common include, how big or how small is acceptable, understanding that 10,000, the parameter we have from the legislation as written, rural or remote areas of less than 10,000 inhabitants. And the best we've been able to, we've circled back, we talked to our attorneys, we talked to colleagues who understand the intention within Department of Energy and elsewhere, who understand the intention of the legislation. And the best we can offer is that we are working to less than 10,000 inhabitants and not more. We do have questions often about the potential aggregation of projects and understanding that we may be, the difficulty will be involved with reaching the people less than, communities, especially unincorporated communities of less than 10,000 people, to make formal proposals, to do formal program planning, to understand and address permitting, licensing required for the big demonstration projects, and then follow through with implementation and shoulder the reporting requirements and or just involvement of a big Department of Energy in addition to local stakeholders. We recognize that there is room for, and we are interested in understanding stakeholders' vision for aggregation of projects. Is there a hub, or are there regional or other players who may be able to propose on behalf of multiple projects or communities? And we had a lot of questions about the provisions or the legislation themselves, BIL and Inflation Reduction Act, how tax credits may or may not couple up with the federal funds, how federal funds may be used from our program or may not be used in addition to federal funds from elsewhere in Department of Energy, USDA, EPA, Department of Interior. And the simplest answer we can give so far is we cannot duplicate federal funding for any particular project scope. There's a difference with the IRA tax credits, and then those may be coupled with project funding from our program and others. And I'm sorry that we're not spending a lot of time on all of those kinds of questions because we're trying to really stick to sharing the outlines of our program, but we will take your questions on that. And we're working on a way to convey in simplest terms what we understand about the IRA broadly on our website eventually. Send us your questions, even though we may not be able to answer them, I guess would be my lesson there. And the last thing that I would mention, my colleague, Melissa Klumbara, who's one of our leaders over portfolio strategy in the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, has a lot to offer on this with experience, but we hear a lot of questions about the cost share. We are legislated to provide 50-50 cost share for these clean energy demonstration projects. But we understand that that is going to be challenging. And we have heard this over and over again at these workshops and in the smaller engagements, one-on-one engagements with stakeholders that my program is providing. And so we would let you know that we do have waiver authority for the Secretary of Energy to waive some or portion, undetermined portion of that cost share from the stakeholders' perspective. But we need to understand from you what would make the most sense and what would make it ultimately possible for those communities we most want to reach with improved reliability and cost-effective energy provision. What will work, what's possible in order to get one of these projects going in your community. The best way to provide us that information, we're taking it from you during this workshop as we can, but respond to our RFI that Sarah described. That we have it in writing means a great deal to us in our efforts to do the paperwork, the internal processing necessary to determine a cost share difference, a variance from that 50-50 cost share rule. I'll stop there. Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am gonna, just because there has been several questions about this too, coming in through a chat box, the 10,000 inhabitants. So there are some questions around perhaps it is less than 10,000, but during summer it gets over more. Are we going to be looking at kind of what those possibilities are, and is the best thing to do to put those examples in the RFI itself so we can consider all of those instances and circumstances that might push in on what 10,000 really means? What's the best way for folks participating to demonstrate what that definition means to them?
Thank you. That's a good question about the community that would change. Ultimately, what we keep coming back to is the spirit and the purpose of the provision is 10,000 and less, not one more. That said, please respond to our request for information with a situation that varies or a situation where there's doubt. That is the best way to let us know, what your situation is and gives us a chance to consider it, ask our attorneys, and talk with other federal programs, understand how they're handling it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a couple more for you. Another questions that have come in, it's just about the timeline. As we've said before, we're in this generation of feedback, RFI, and design period. But do we have any clarity on the timing for when a funding opportunity announcement will come out? And second question, is there any information on how long that application window will be?
Sorry, I can't answer either of those questions given the nature of that, what's ultimately the beginning of what will develop into a contracting process. We anticipate in early 2023 for the funding opportunity announcement. And I would put in another pitch for soliciting your opinions, stakeholders, your best explanation of what you need. I mean, what is the time window that will work best for you? Understanding we can't, we can't do everything we want to do. We're not going to be able to leave it open for probably as long as we would like. And I'm sorry, I'm being intentionally vague, but we would be interested to hear what would work best for you and your community. And thinking through the fact that we're going to have multiple funding opportunity announcements likely through 2026, is there a way that you can imagine what would be helpful in 2023 versus 2024, 2025? And I would just ask your patience and understanding that we will learn from the initial processes and refine as we go. Thank you.
Thanks, Regina. And last question for you. It's been mentioned, and even on the website, that we'll be developing this program in consultation with the Department of Interior. Can you provide any other details behind that?
I mean, honestly, not a lot so far. All of our federal partners, we are all grappling with what the big funding amounts mean, and we're all forming our programs in real time. So what I can offer is that we are coordinating with Department of Interior. We understand the call and the requirement for consultation with them. We're doing that at a working level, at a higher level, and going forward, we will stay coordinated with them. Another pitch to solicit your opinions and ideas based on what stakeholders know about or your experience with Department of Interior and Department of Energy programs. Is there something you can think about, some suggestion for us that would be helpful to implementation of this program, given that explicit link? I'll just also offer that we're working with all the federal partners, also EPA, USDA, in addition to Department of Interior and many others. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been other questions, and I can take this one. What can communities do between the RFI and the release of the FOA to prepare for applying for this grant? It's really our intention that we'll continue to do workshops and provide engagement platforms to inform you all of where we are and what technical assistance might be provided. So now that you've kind of shown up to this workshop, good news is we do have your email, and we plan to continue to keep up with you. So we'll inform you of those opportunities as we move forward. Thank you so much, Regina and Sarah, appreciate your time with us today. And for some other questions that I'm seeing come through, some are very specific to what are the project types and what does energy efficiency mean? What are the outcomes and the performance indicators? At this point, we're not sure. We have a lot of ideas, but given the reach and breadth of this program and how broad it is, we do want to hear from you. We want to understand what is going on in your communities and what types of energy projects are happening or what could happen. And that, again, you're going to hear us today and tomorrow kind of pitch, and it is a pleasant pitch of please submit your comments to the request for information, because the more information we have to your reality, the more we can design a program that truly meets the needs. So really a lot of your questions are very, I would say, kind of progressive in where we are in designing the program. And the RFI, though, you all are asking great questions. It's exactly what we're trying to understand. And we will send that link. We will post it out here today, also tomorrow, and then follow up with you all with that link as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Climbara and my colleague Jill Capitoso. I'll ask you all to do the same thing, come on video to begin your presentations. And Melissa is our Director of Portfolio Strategy. She works really across OCED in the provision. So I'll kind of ask you to do the same thing that Regina did. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience and your role, and why you see this program as unique and truly supporting rural and remote areas across the U.S. And then we can jump into your slides.
Can you hear me okay? I'm assuming you can. So I'm Melissa Climbara, I'm the Director for Portfolio Strategy. I've been at DOE for nearly 20 years. My background is chemical engineering. Prior to coming to DOE, I actually worked in the pulp and paper industry. Living in, I'm originally from a small town in Pennsylvania, northeastern PA. But similar to Regina, Regina, like my roots have been in energy efficiency and renewable energy from the beginning. At DOE, I worked mostly in the bioenergy technology office, as well as in the advanced manufacturing office more recently. And I have a lot of experience doing kind of first of its kind technology, pilot, demo, and commercial scale through the biorefinery projects that we had under originally the Recovery Act back early in 2008, 2016 timeframe. So I bring a lot of experience to the table and OCED in kind of lessons learned for managing first of a kind new technology demonstrations. Which when Regina and others walk through the portfolio of projects that we have in the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations, they really cover kind of a really broad array of different technologies as we think about our kind of pathway to deep decarbonization, whether that's hydrogen or advanced nuclear, carbon capture, energy storage. But these provisions are really unique in that they really are about, connecting with communities and making sure that we have an equitable transition to clean energy. And so that's what I think it means. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about how we're thinking about project management across the, all of these technologies. And we realize that this isn't really a cookie cutter approach, especially for this provision, which is very unique. And we know that we are going to need to do a lot of, we need your feedback through this workshop and through the RFI on how we're thinking about project management and what type of technical assistance or other assistance that you might need in getting a project demo ready. And then as we develop, design, construct, and operate those type of clean energy projects, what type of support that you would need throughout those different development cycles. And so if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to take a little bit of a zoom out. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Department of Energy, we really cover a really broad, what we call TRL or technology readiness level range. And so at the Department of Energy, we have offices like Office of Science, that is really fundamental research, all the way through applied programs, which is where I grew up in at DOE, working in the bioenergy technology office that really fits that applied office range. And then most of you might be familiar with the loan programs office, which is really at this other end of the spectrum of technology readiness, where those are really bankable projects with very low risk. And so the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration was created last year around this time to really fill this risk space in between development and deployment. And so we've been thinking about that a lot with how we design these programs around how we want to manage risks and make sure projects are truly demo ready across the different technologies that I mentioned. And then what type of assistance do we need to provide to help the different technology developers or communities kind of get their projects into the pipeline to be, finalize the energy and engineering designs, get, project financing, get different agreements in place to do construction and then operations. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we really are trying to, what does success look like for OCED is really de-risking these technologies, and so that we can really unlock private sector investment and trying to think about how we manage those risks and that we have models going forward that are, business models for these different technologies that the private sector can see these technologies being demonstrated and then want to bring more investment to the table and then replicate that across the nation. And so we really want, to have a partnership going forward with how these, 50-50 cost share is what we mentioned before, but for these provisions, we understand that that type of cost share support might be hard for some communities to bring to the table. And so we really want to have this investment partnership hand in hand in how the projects are being developed. from conception all the way through to execution. We want to be able to provide, OCED was set up to really be the center of excellence on project management and oversight, bringing in all these lessons learned from other offices over the years on, what went well, what didn't go so well, and really building that into how we do project management oversight. And so we want to work with you to make sure that these projects are developed and executed as close to on time and on budget as possible. And manage the risks throughout the development process. And we do that through really gating our process at different phases of development and providing different assistance that we can along the way to help the projects be successful. So if you go to the next slide, it details out how we're thinking about each of these phases. This is not meant to frighten you with all the details on this slide. For the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations, this is how we're thinking about all of the work that we're doing writ large. And we understand that this might need to be tailored, especially for this provision, as we think about, how demonstration ready some of these communities are with their ideas for different projects that fit into this provision. And so there might be a lot more, technical assistance or project development support needs on the front end in order to prepare communities to put in ideas for clean energy projects and to do, create networking opportunities, to develop teams, to get financing in place, and to, figure out different sites or different technologies for whatever type of clean energy solution fits their needs. And so when you look at this phased approach, please take a look at what we're thinking would be done at each phase of project development. But we also want your feedback on, how much support might you need. I mean, Regina already mentioned, cost share. We have gotten a lot of feedback about that. So please continue to provide that feedback. But, at other stages of project development, depending on where you're at, please let us know how you're thinking about what type of support you would need in order to get to, an application ready or demonstration ready. And that's the type of things that we're trying to think through and how we develop the program design around technical assistance or things that we might do, other mechanisms we might use to help get communities ready to put in a project that could be developed and constructed and operated to provide whatever clean energy support that they're looking for in their community. So with that, I think that's my last slide. I am happy to kind of leave these slides with you and collect feedback either through questions in real time or through the RFI. We would really love to hear your feedback on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. And now I'd like to introduce Jill.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Capitosto, and I'm one of the Energy Justice Liaisons at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. And I wanted to talk today about the importance of equity and energy and environmental justice at DOE and at OCED in particular, and how it's shaping our work here, including our funding opportunities. So we've already introduced OCED a little bit on this call and talked about our mission, which includes supporting an equitable transition to a clean energy system. And so we are working in concert with all government agencies on this priority. And today, this presentation is going to touch on why EEJ, or energy and environmental justice, is so important as we begin to plan, design, and implement all of the new energy infrastructure and look at energy systems across the country as part of this equitable transition. So in this presentation, I'll give some background on the Justice 40 initiative, which is one of the driving initiatives at the federal level supporting energy and environmental justice. And I'll talk about how we're supporting Justice 40 here at OCED. And then I'll give an overview of how we're thinking about energy and environmental justice and our funding opportunities. And hopefully this is a chance to get people thinking early about these priorities and how they're a part of this program. So we can go to the next slide. This is not the slide I was expecting to have next, but we can start with this. So focusing here on what are energy and environmental justice. So environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, national origin, or income, and the ability of all these people to participate in the development, implementation, and enforcement of decisions that affect their environments, with environment being very broadly construed. It's the places where we live, work, and play, and ensure that everyone has the same degree of protection and access to decision making. And the environmental justice movement stemmed from the civil rights movement and really focused on traditional kind of aspects of the environmental protection. A lot of it had to do with pollution exposure. And energy justice was born from the environmental justice movement. And it's focused on the social and economic participation of all people in the energy system. So it's looking at the remediation of social, economic, and health burdens on frontline communities, which are the communities most impacted by our energy system, the ones most likely to bear the burdens and receive the fewest benefits. And it's really focusing on centering the concerns of these communities. And the primary goals are to create more accessible, affordable, clean, and democratically managed energy. So we are looking to the environmental justice and energy justice movements as we're thinking about the framework that we want to apply for OCED in supporting these the goals of equity and justice. Next slide. So the Justice 40 initiative, to get into a little bit more detail on that, is an executive order that directs 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to flow to disadvantaged communities. I will talk more about all of these aspects of this executive order later on, but some people already are very familiar with Justice 40 and have a lot of questions from the outset. So I just want to clarify a few things up front, and then we'll come back and talk in more detail about Justice 40 later on in this presentation. But I want to say first and foremost that 40%, when we're talking about 40% of overall benefits, it's not calculated on a per project basis. Individual projects may contribute more or less to this goal. Where it's also talking about 40% of benefits. So that's talking about environmental, social, economic benefits, and it's not just about direct investments. So it's not saying that 40% of investments have to flow to disadvantaged communities. It's more looking at the benefits. And then also want to highlight that Department of Energy has a working definition of a disadvantaged communities, but projects do not need to be located in a disadvantaged community or DAC to contribute to Justice 40. So if you're not familiar with Justice 40, all this will make more sense when we come back to this later on, but just wanted to address some of those points of confusion early on. Next slide. So to kind of frame this conversation, maybe starting here now at the real beginning, why do we want to focus on energy and environmental justice? The answer is simple, and it's that our energy system is inequitable. This has been borne out in research again and again that shows that the benefits and burdens of our energy system are not shared equally. Communities that are low income, including a lot of times communities of color, also rural communities, have disproportionate negative impacts without equitable access to the benefits of our energy system. So low income households, disproportionately, again, households of color or rural households, have to often make difficult and dangerous choices about whether to put food on the table or heat their homes. They are also much more likely to face outages during storm events, and they have much higher exposure to air, water, soil pollution, but at the same time, they have the least access to clean, reliable energy. Next slide. So when we think about what this looks like in the US, a lot of the time, the way that we talk about this is in terms of energy burden and energy insecurity. And for some of you, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the things I'll cover in the next couple slides, but just to make sure that we're all starting from the same page, energy burden is the household energy costs divided by income. So when we're thinking about that, there are two components to that equation. And intuitively, it makes sense that when income decreases, energy burden increases. However, income is not the only factor here to consider. Energy costs are also not equal across the board. And a lot of times, especially in rural communities, household energy costs are going to be much higher for a number of reasons, including maybe lower access to energy efficiency systems or kind of technologies and upgrades, perhaps also just higher energy costs from the state of the grid or from more difficult access to energy. So energy burden kind of across the board is something that weighs more heavily a lot of times on rural households. Another important point here is to talk about energy insecurity, which reflects the inability of households to pay for basic energy needs, so heating, cooling, and light. And on the right here, you can see a graph of households that experience energy insecure situations. This is from 2015, and 1 in 3 US households reported experiencing energy insecurity at that time, which is a pretty striking number. And if we go to the next slide, we can see some of that broken down a little bit more. So we'll start with the graph here on the right. And I want to highlight that looking at income brackets, households with less than 20,000 per year in income were significantly more likely to experience energy insecurity. Again, when we think about how that what that definition is, that makes a lot of sense, but it's still really important to point out. And also look at the differences between different racial groups, and want to highlight that Black and African American households, over 50% of them experience energy insecurity. And then if we look here at the graph on the left, that shows the difference between energy burden experienced by households in rural versus metropolitan areas. And you can see in every region of the US that rural households experience significantly higher rates of energy burden than metropolitan households. And then on the next slide, we can see here how these questions of justice and equity go beyond just energy burden and energy poverty. So we look here at exposure versus monitoring. So exposure to pollutants from our energy system or exposure to